So today we learned that 60 Russian diplomats are being expelled from the U.S. after that spy was poisoned by Russians, and that the White House is touting widespread support from commentators who agree that by appointing John Bolton as National Security Advisor, the president has made an excellent choice. Yeah, you read it right. It says commentators, like the kind Bolton was about 5 days ago, arguing for preemptive strikes on North Korea and pushing to declare war on Iran. And yet, do you know what most of the country is focusing on right now? An interview with porn actress Stormy Daniels that was recorded 2 weeks ago, and which 60 Minutes finally aired last night, detailing what she said was her affair with Donald Trump.
He's like, wow, you are special. You remind me of my daughter.
Now, while there's plenty to address there, I'm going to leave that aside for now, because that's not the point. But the incident she described after a magazine offered her money for her story is.
I was in a parking lot going to a fitness class with my infant daughter, and a guy walked up on me and said to me, "Leave Trump alone, forget the story." And then he leaned around and looked at my daughter and said, "A beautiful little girl, it'd be a shame if something happened to her mom."
Daniels said it was that incident that convinced her to sign a non-disclosure agreement, no matter the terms, saying she feared for herself and her family. It's also the reason she says she signed later letters denying her affair under pressure from her prior lawyer.
They made it sound like I had no choice.
I mean, no one was putting a gun to your head.
Not physical violence, no.
You thought that there would be some sort of legal repercussion if you didn't sign it.
Correct. As a matter of fact, the exact sentence used was, "They can make your life hell in many different ways."
The White House has consistently denied all this, and the lawyer for the president's lawyer, Michael Cohen, yes, the lawyer has a lawyer, has since sent Daniels a cease and desist letter demanding she retract the false and defamatory statements she's made. But is this the important story we're treating it as? Or does communications director for 10 days, Anthony Scaramucci, have it right?
I think there'll be less fallout than people think, because I think people have been anesthetized to these sorts of scandals. We'll talk about it. There'll be another news cycle, and then people will move on. That's my prediction.
Joining me with their predictions are Lisa Lerer. She's a national politics reporter for the Associated Press, also a current Harvard Nieman fellow. Good to see you again, Lisa. Thanks for being here. And Joan Vennochi, columnist of the Boston Globe. Nice to see you, too.
Nice to be here.
You know, this is not going to be our primary focus, but since I mentioned it, can you explain to me, why would a guy who ignored the admonition of his staff, who said, "Don't congratulate Putin," doesn't mention the poisoning, doesn't mention election interference, then 48 hours later is expelling 60 diplomats? How do you explain the flip-flop?
That is, I mean, how do you explain any of these flip-flops?
Yeah.
I think you explain them by saying that's President Trump, right? He's going to veto the spending bill, and then
Friday morning.
Right,
yeah.
Friday morning, Friday afternoon, he doesn't veto it. He's going to pass these huge tariffs on trade in China, and then he exempts all these countries. I mean, this is the difference between what happens publicly and what seems to come out of this White House is pretty stark in a lot of areas.
So there's no rational explanation.
I mean, it could be the staff was able to sort of get him to do this, and he hadn't signed up. But what I think sometimes with, and what I'm sure we'll talk about this when we get to the Stormy Daniels.
Just seconds from now.
Seconds from now, when we get to the Stormy Daniels situation. I mean, one of the most striking signals when you talk about reading the tea leaves in Washington from this White House, I think, is silence, right? It's when he doesn't say something that you're sort of like, huh.
So as a Russian expert, do you want to comment on the first
As a
thing
non-Russian expert, I would say he talked about Russia today because of Stormy Daniels, that he wanted to change the conversation, and that was one sure way to do it.
You know, Maggie Haberman from the New York Times said that she had heard from reliable sources that he announced the hiring of John Bolton when he did on that afternoon was an attempt to divert attention away from Karen McDougal's interview later that night. Since you mentioned Stormy Daniels, should we be embarrassed, we in the media and we as human beings, for the amount of attention we spent leading up to this thing and in the interview itself last night?
I mean, I'm going to defend our profession here. I think it's a big deal.
What part of it?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's like a new breaking of norms when we're talking about the president's, like, condom usage, which I can't even believe I'm saying on this program. So there's that part of it. But there's also the part where there was potentially illegal activity going on. You know, Michael Cohen has denied that the Trump organization or the Trump campaign authorized that payment to Stormy Daniels, but he conspicuously did not deny that President Trump himself had paid or was involved in that payment. So there is the potential for something illegal to have gone on here. And also, you have to wonder how it ties into Mueller's investigation.
Let's get to Mueller in a second. By the way, here's
Yeah.
Trevor Potter, the former head of the Federal Election Commission, last night on 60 Minutes saying that very same thing.
The payment of the money just creates an enormous legal mess. It's a $130,000 in-kind contribution by Cohen to the Trump campaign. And if he does this on behalf of his client, the candidate, that is a coordinated, illegal, in-kind contribution.
So should we be less embarrassed? Because there is some there. I mean, that is a potential serious violation, no?
The threat, I think, is the big news. And what makes it
the threat in the parking lot.
The threat in the parking lot, and what makes it sort of more valid as media coverage. But I don't think it's all as groundbreaking as some people seem to think.
Why not?
I mean, it's a lot like the whole Bill Clinton story with Jennifer Flowers and the assortment of women. That I think the problem...
Except these were consensual,
right,
not
saying,
all of Bill Clinton's
right, I'm
were.
saying the problem that Stormy Daniels has is that she's not Monica Lewinsky. She's not a White House intern who's having sex with a president in the Oval Office. It happened 12 years ago. It was consensual. It was not really an affair. It was a one-night stand by her own account. I think that really sets it apart, and I agree with Scaramucci, I hate to say.
But, you know, one of the things, when you touched on Mueller a second ago, Lisa, what I've heard in the last couple of days, people have compared the potential direction of Mueller at Michael Cohen to what he did with Manafort. He indicts Manafort, tax evasion and bank fraud, which has nothing to do with Russia, in the hopes that he'll be squeezed. Well, same situation here. Cohen's involved in trying to negotiate a Trump Tower in 2015, contact with top Kremlin people in 2016, indict him potentially for campaign finance violation and squeeze him on the Russia stuff. Is that where you're going?
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go. You laid out the case that I was going to make beautifully. I think there's another thing here, too, which is I think President Trump's relationships with women, and while this was consensual, there were plenty of things that were not consensual, and it wasn't clear that it was consensual. That's what Stormy Daniels said. But if you listen to that interview, she said, oh man, when he came out, in whatever state he came out, in his apartment, oh, I'm really in it now, I wasn't attracted to him. So there's consensual and there's different levels of consent, right? And I think that also, his long history of relationship with women, consensual and non-consensual, is what keeps this in the news as
By the
well.
way, but the non-consensual were the 19 people who most of the voters knew about when they decided he should be the president of the United States. Can I, you know, you mentioned women. Can I mention one more woman who I'm surprised hasn't come up in this conversation yet, which is really what creeped me out about this whole thing?
Ivanka.
First, we're going to hear what was said by Stormy Daniels, then Karen McDougal a few days ago, and then from years ago, Donald Trump, human citizen Trump, on The View. Just listen to this.
He's like, wow, you are special. You remind me of my daughter.
He said I was beautiful like her. I heard a lot about her.
If Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her. You know?
And he tells Howard Stern years ago she's always been, quote, very voluptuous. I have to say, it turned my stomach in ways that I can't even describe. It's not illegal. It's not. He's not violating some ethical. Well, maybe he is. What was your reaction? Am I overreacting?
Well, he's a creep, and people elected him knowing he was a creep.
His daughter. It's not another woman. It's not a playmate. It's not a woman he.
No one wishes that it would hurt Donald Trump more than I do. I just am not sure it moves the needle with the so-called base.
I'm not sure either.
Is this the thing that moves the needle? We can be disgusted, your stomach can turn, but does it change the political balance?
I don't know.
Mueller, that could.
What was your reaction to all the Ivanka stuff, or the latest Ivanka thing?
I mean, I agree with you. It's not. It's a little, certainly more than a little creepy. And it was one of several similarities between those two accounts of those two women who hadn't seen each other's interviews, was my understanding based on the taping. So that was kind of interesting, right? Because when the stories sound so similar, it certainly lends a stronger sense of credibility. I think you're right about the base. It probably won't move the base, right? I'm not sure what would move the base. But I'm also not sure that the base is what matters. What matters is, certainly for the midterms, these suburban women and some men, but in the suburbs of Toledo or wherever, and whether this moves them. And I think it could. I mean, hearing all this stuff about the president with a porn star and this woman and that woman, yes, it didn't convince them in the campaign, but the campaign was close, and that, on top of all these other things, the chaos in the White House, the Mueller investigation, I do wonder if it does have an impact. It's hard to ever trace these elections back to one account, but it does shape a narrative of the president.
And wouldn't that be classic Donald Trump? Someone else pays the price for his bad behavior if it affects the midterms, right. and they pay the price, but he escapes unscathed.
Well, he pays the price if he loses the midterms, too. By the way, I was just told that Stormy Daniels' lawyers filed a defamation suit against Michael Cohen, so it all continues. Joan Vennochi, it's great to see you.
Thank you.
Lisa, thanks so much. Great to see you again, too. Appreciate it.